But yeah, there was absolutely no profit motive in these at all whatsoever. But as you went further on and got past these are some other examples. Another common parody of these were Dick Tracy. But then some of them were actually, would come up and create their own characters. There was very popular ones, was Boots. Fuller Brushman was another very popular character. So that's another reason why it's pretty obvious that these were created by people that were actually in the industry. That these weren't just random people making these things. Because like I said, they wouldn't have had the access to the materials to make these things. And by 1933, we get what is called Funnies on Parade. And this is, by most standards, considered the very first comic book. So what is all this was taking those established comic strips that were popular at the time in regular newspapers and magazines. This is the very first compilation of said comic strips put into a book form. And that's why it's considered basically the very first actual comic book, because nothing else was ever compiled and distributed as one solid book. Otherwise you would only see these in strip mode on a day-to-day basis in the newspaper or on Sunday papers. But from that first initial comic book, we then get later on into the first really main company that established the actual industry of comic books, and that would be EC Comics. But this is not the same EC Comics that you're familiar with that are known for like the Tales from the Crypt and all that. These were a different company, and again, I left my notes at my table, so I'm sorry, but it was before Entertaining Comics. It was Educational Comics, and that was established by William Gaines. And when William Gaines started it, basically the only way that they basically could kind of afford to even launch this was to not hire artists or writers that would create their own content, right? Because then they would have to pay different royalties and all that. So what they did basically was just use established content that was already basically free use, is beyond any kind of copyright law or anything like that, so that they wouldn't have to pay anybody to write them or anything like that. Because again, this is the very beginnings of the industry. And so they basically would always have to use simple things like Bible stories and other things that were considered, free use, which would be like Canterbury Tales, even some Shakespeare plays that would just basically be transferred, Grimm's fairy tales, things like that. Things that they wouldn't have to pay a writer to actually come up with and create. But that definitely became a huge launching point for what would become Entertaining Comics. And that would be in 1950. So the founder of EC Comics, William Gaines, happens to die of mysterious circumstances in a boating accident. And after that, his son takes over the company. And at this point, now they have got some establishment. They have made some gains in their publishing and making, different huge profit margins now. And so now they can afford to pay artists and writers, to do and create their own stories. And so at the time, the most popular things that were available or in pop culture, you had basically true crime, you had horror, and you had what was now becoming science fiction, which were very popular themes at the time. So you went from just funny little animal comics and goofy little scenarios like that with animal comics and stuff like Blondie and Popeye, and you get into a far more serious range of creativity with the writing and the artwork, because now you're delving into really, really more character-driven art, stories and arcs. And so that's why I say basically really comics begin to grow up, because it's no longer just cute little animals.